There's something sacred about the words we choose when the heart is still aching. When the silence of someone we loved turns into absence, every message becomes more than just text. It becomes a reflection of the soul. You've probably sat in front of your phone, fingers hesitating above the keyboard, asking yourself if reaching out would bring relief or only deepen the wound. That quiet tension between needing to express and fearing to be ignored. It lives in the body. It tightens the chest. It stirs the memory of all the times your truth wasn't received with care. Louise taught us that words carry energy, that every thought, every phrase we speak or write, sends ripples into the universe and back into ourselves. But when we've been hurt, when we've been left unread, the act of writing becomes a risk. Instead of expression, it starts to feel like a test. Will I be enough this time? Will he see me now? And that's where we lose ourselves. Because the message starts serving the fear, not the truth. It becomes a plea, not a presence. But here's the shift. When a woman writes from her center, not from her wound, the vibration changes. A message born from wholeness doesn't beg to be remembered. It simply is. It lingers. It stays. Not because it screams, but because it carries something real, like the scent of a perfume on a scarf he forgot he still had. Suddenly, it's all back. Not because you asked to be seen, but because you were already light. Sometimes the most unforgettable words are the quietest, the ones that don't perform, don't try to prove, don't pretend. They don't say, "Please love me." They whisper, "This is who I am." And that is magnetic, because men forget many things. Where they put their keys, what day it is, even the names of songs they once played on repeat. But they rarely forget how a woman made them feel, especially when her words echoed something eternal. Marianne Williamson once wrote that love has memory and purpose, that when something is said from the soul, it's heard beyond the ears. It's felt in the body, remembered in the spirit. That's why this video isn't just about what to text a man. It's about what kind of message you leave in his memory. And more importantly, what kind of message you leave in yourself. Let's begin with the first message, but not as advice, as a remembering, as a soft return to your own voice. There's something disarming about honesty when it stands alone, not polished, not performed, just offered, as is. The first message a man never forgets is the one that doesn't try to impress him, win him back, or awaken his regret. It's the kind of message that simply exists, like a quiet truth spoken into a still room. I'm not trying to be unforgettable. I'm simply being honest. These words hold no hook, no trap. They don't chase. And perhaps that's why they linger. Because we live in a world where so many messages are crafted like bait, where women feel pressured to sound perfect, wise, cool, or unaffected, just to avoid seeming too much. But what if enoughness wasn't about performance? What if your truth, raw, unpolished, unfiltered, was already the most unforgettable part of you? When a man receives that kind of message, it confuses him at first. Not because he doesn't understand it, but because it doesn't fit the usual pattern. There's no need to decode, no hidden request, no emotional invoice waiting to be paid, just presence, just truth. And that's rare. The absence of manipulation is what makes it stand out. It creates a strange kind of stillness in him, because he's used to messages that need something from him. But this one doesn't. This one simply reflects who you are, and in doing so, it gives him a mirror, a moment to see himself too, without pressure, without defense. There's a quiet power in that kind of message. It doesn't scream, "See me." It simply says, "I see myself." And in that space, something shifts. Some mornings speak louder than any message we could send. There's a kind of clarity that only appears in the quiet moments. When the coffee is still warm, the rain taps gently against the window, and for a few seconds, the world feels whole again. This morning I made coffee, watched the rain, and remembered how peace feels. That's not a line you send to make someone miss you. That's a truth you share because it's real. Because in that moment, you remembered yourself. And that's the beauty of this kind of message. It doesn't scream, "Look what you lost." It whispers, "Look what I found. You, your rhythm, your life." And whether he replies or not becomes secondary, because the message wasn't about pulling him back. It was about honoring your own presence. The paradox is, that when a man feels you're no longer orbiting around his silence, when he senses that you're living, something awakens in him. Respect, curiosity, maybe even longing. But more than anything, he begins to realize that you exist beyond his absence. Too often, we try to use our words to fill the space left by someone's withdrawal. But this kind of message does the opposite. It doesn't try to pull him in. It reflects that you're already standing on solid ground, that you haven't disappeared inside the waiting, that life didn't stop when he stopped showing up. And that is unforgettable, because it reminds him that he's not the center of your world, but he was a part of a moment that still holds beauty, not for what it promised, but for what it revealed. Sometimes love doesn't mean losing yourself to hold on to someone else. Sometimes it's the ability to say, I like who I am when I'm with you, but I also love who I am alone. There's grace in that kind of message. It doesn't diminish anyone. It doesn't place blame. It doesn't beg to be seen. Instead, it celebrates something sacred, your own becoming. Louise Hay often said that loving yourself is the greatest act of love you can offer the world. And when you express that love in a message, not as defiance, not as armor, but as truth, it creates a ripple that goes far deeper than seduction or strategy. It shows that you're not asking him to complete you. You're inviting him to witness you. And there's a world of difference between needing to be chosen and choosing yourself first. This kind of message doesn't compete. It doesn't try to prove that you've moved on or that you're above it all. It simply reflects that you're whole, that even if you felt broken at some point, you've gathered the pieces, not to impress, but to heal. And when a man reads something like that, something in him pauses, because it doesn't just show confidence, it shows consciousness. He may not say it out loud, but he'll feel it. He'll feel the difference between a woman who texts from her emptiness and a woman who writes from her center, between a message that tries to pull and a message that simply stands. Because a woman who knows her worth doesn't need to shout it. She simply lives it. And that is unforgettable. There's a quiet courage in choosing not to chase, in letting go of the idea that love must always be pursued, explained, or rescued. When you say, I won't chase you, but I'll always be somewhere real, you're not closing the door. You're simply refusing to abandon yourself to keep it open. That kind of message doesn't demand attention. It invites presence. It doesn't control. It allows. And that's what makes it powerful. Because most people are used to pressure, to emotional weight disguised as affection. But when a message carries no force, no expectation, no emotional ransom, just authenticity, it creates a kind of freedom. For you and for him. The freedom to meet in truth, not in need. Sometimes what we call love becomes a performance, a script where one waits, the other withdraws, and both pretend not to feel what they're feeling. But a message like this interrupts the pattern. It speaks from a place of peace. It says, I'm not going to lose myself in your absence. I'm not here to manipulate your response. I'm simply here, in my truth, in my clarity. And if you ever choose to meet me there, I'll still be real. That changes something, not because it pressures him to return, but because it reminds him what it feels like to be met without demands. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knows that kind of space. Space where nothing is being asked, yet everything is being offered, is rare. And once you've felt it, once you've been invited into it, you don't forget it. There's a moment when the heart wants to speak, not to win someone back, not to be rescued, but simply to honor what it feels. I don't know what this is for you, but for me, it's something I'd rather feel than forget. This isn't a plea. It's not a trap. It's not a question hidden in poetry. It's just truth, delivered with trembling hands and an open soul. Most people are afraid to feel deeply unless they're guaranteed it will be returned. But love, real love, never came with guarantees. It came with presence. And when you write something like this, you're not surrendering your power. You're reclaiming it, because it takes more strength to feel fully without control than to stay numb in fear. This kind of message doesn't ask him to decide anything. It doesn't push him into a corner or ask for labels. It simply reflects what is alive in you, what is real, and that realness can be disarming, especially for someone who isn't used to being met without armor, because we've all played roles. We've all sent messages masked in strategy. But this is different. It's not designed to seduce. It's not packaged to be liked. It's born from the soul. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest, because it doesn't fear silence, because it doesn't run from vulnerability. It leans in, it breathes, it says, "This is what's here for me, whether you stay or go." And in that offering, there's a kind of emotional nobility, a quiet, courageous dignity, one that echoes long after the words have been read. Sometimes healing sounds like admitting what hurt you, but without letting it define who you are. I reacted in pain, but my essence is still whole, just like yours. These words carry something few messages ever do: accountability without self-erasure. They speak of a woman who has looked at her wounds not to justify them, but to understand them. And in that understanding, she's found her way back to herself. This kind of message doesn't shrink in shame, nor does it inflate in pride. It stands, it breathes. It says, "Yes, I made a mistake, but I am not the mistake." That distinction is everything, because when you acknowledge your own reaction, but still speak from your center, you're showing a man something he might not have seen before, a woman who can own her experience without abandoning her truth. We're so used to seeing apologies as currency, as something you give up to get something back. But this isn't that. This isn't an apology crafted to pull him closer. It's a recognition of both your humanity and his. It says, "I'm aware of how I showed up, but I haven't lost myself in it." And that's a rare kind of clarity. Louise Hay often reminded us that our true self is untouched by the storms we've endured, that who we are at our core remains whole, even when our emotions feel shattered. When a man receives a message like this, something shifts, because it doesn't just reflect regret, it reflects resilience. It reminds him that emotional depth isn't about perfection, it's about presence. And that kind of presence lingers, not because it pleads to be remembered, but because it holds a mirror. And in that mirror, he may see not just your truth, but his own. There's a kind of magic in being seen for who you could become, not just for who you are now. I believe in the part of you that you sometimes forget. It's not a compliment. It's not a line. It's a mirror held gently, with reverence. It speaks to the part of him that may be buried under layers of fear, doubt, or defense. And that's why it stays. That's why he rereads it. Because most of us, at some point, forget our own light. We collapse into roles. We carry the weight of past failures. And slowly, quietly, we start to believe that we are no more than our mistakes. But when someone reminds you of the beauty you've forgotten, not to manipulate you, not to fix you, but just to remind you, it does something powerful. It restores. It awakens. This message doesn't ask him to change. It doesn't demand that he rise up or prove himself. It simply reflects faith. Not blind faith, not naive hope, but soulful recognition. A remembering that there is something sacred in him that's worth honoring, even if he doesn't live from it every day, even if he's lost touch with it himself. When a woman sends this kind of message, it marks him, not because she flattered him, but because she touched something deeper. She saw past the mask, past the withdrawal, past the confusion. And in doing so, she called forth the part of him that longs to be better, not for her, not for approval, but because he was reminded that he's capable of more. Men don't forget women who see them, not for their flaws, not for their charm, but for their essence. Because being seen in that way, that's rare, that's sacred. And when it happens, it echoes. Sometimes for years, sometimes for a lifetime. Not every message needs to be written. Some are felt. Some are carried in the pauses, the stillness, the space between responses. There's a kind of message that lives in silence, not cold, not punishing, but sacred. It's the message that isn't sent, yet says everything. The message that whispers, "I no longer need to explain myself to be understood." When words become constant, when they are used to chase, to clarify, to hold on, their power begins to fade. But silence, intentional, rooted silence, can become the most eloquent message of all. Because in that space, you're not withholding, you're honoring. You're saying, "I trust myself enough to let this breathe." And that trust is felt. He may not admit it, but he notices the difference. The shift from a woman who texts out of fear to a woman who rests in her knowing. The quiet between your last words and your next speaks volumes. Not of absence, but of presence. Presence with yourself. presence with the moment. Presence with the truth that not every message needs to be sent to be received. Sometimes, what isn't said is what awakens him the most, because the space you leave becomes a mirror he wasn't ready to face. And in that mirror, he may not see your need for him. He may see the need he has to find himself. And that realization doesn't come from pressure. It comes from contrast, from the realization that your silence wasn't a punishment. It was a prayer, a space for truth to return in its own time, or not at all. And that kind of message, that kind of silence, is never forgotten. Some goodbyes carry more love than the words that tried to hold things together. I'm grateful for the good. I release the rest. Take care. It's the kind of message that doesn't pretend to be indifferent, doesn't carry bitterness wrapped in politeness. It's a closure that honors the truth of what was, while letting go of what no longer serves. Louise Hay once said, "Forgiveness releases, love heals." And this kind of message is a living example of that. It doesn't deny the hurt. It doesn't sugarcoat the disappointment, but it doesn't let the pain become the final word. Instead, it leaves the door open to growth. Not reconciliation, not return, but understanding. It's not a door to the past. It's a path toward inner peace. When you send a message like this, you're not showing weakness. You're showing wisdom. You're saying, "I've carried this long enough. I bless what we had, and I let it go." That energy is felt. It reaches him not just in his mind, but in his memory. It marks the moment when you chose yourself, when you no longer needed to be right, needed to be understood, needed to be needed. You just needed to be free. And that freedom, it's powerful, because it doesn't deny the love. It doesn't deny the loss. It simply says, "I choose to walk forward with grace." And men don't forget that. Not because it made them feel guilty, but because it reminded them of what it looks like when someone leaves, not out of anger, but in peace. And peace, when it's that deep, it echoes. Louise Hay taught us that words are seeds, and just like seeds, they grow into what we plant with intention, or what we scatter without care. Each message you send doesn't just reach the other person. It reaches you first. It shapes your own emotional landscape. So when you write to a man, especially one who mattered, you're not just writing to him. You're writing to your own story, to your own healing. That's why the 7 messages we explored aren't about strategy or seduction. They are about self-honor, about choosing to express from a place of truth rather than trauma. They're the kind of words that, even if never replied to, leave a trace in the soul, not because they chased, but because they carried something sacred, authenticity. Marianne Williamson reminds us that true love never seeks to possess. It liberates. It doesn't seek to be remembered. It simply becomes unforgettable by how it touched the spirit. When your words carry that vibration, they stop being about whether he answers. They start being about what you affirmed in yourself when you sent them. He might forget your face. He might forget the details of your voice or the patterns of your routine. But what stays is the way your words made him feel, not because they begged, but because they breathed, because they carried light. Because through them, you helped him remember who he could become, just by standing in the fullness of who you already are. And if this journey has stirred something in you, if it made you remember the strength beneath your tenderness, the clarity beneath your longing, then stay close. Subscribe to this space. Let it be your emotional home. And if your heart still wants more, there's another video waiting on your screen right now, one that will take you even deeper into the wisdom your soul already knows. Click and keep walking. You're not alone.